We're on the street is Snoop has just been hit with a massive sentence in connection to Nippy's death. And if you've been following the rumors, this might not come as a surprise, especially with his rumored ties to Big U. The man some say actually plotted it and even slipped up about it.
You get a call from Big U telling you Nipsey just got killed.
Yeah.
You panic, call Nip. Nip answer the phone.
Yeah.
So how does Snoop Dogg connect to all of this? According to what people claim the police discovered, the story takes a dramatic turn. Let me break it down. Before we talk about the parking lot, the gunshots, the trial, or the sentencing, we have to address the elephant in the room. Because the idea of Snoop Dogg being tied to Nipsey Hussle's death didn't just appear out of nowhere. The moment Nipsey Hussle was gunned down outside his Marathon clothing store on March 31st, 2019, the internet didn't just mourn. It immediately began searching for answers, and in many corners of social media, that quickly turned into speculation and finger-pointing. Among conspiracy forums, deep-dive comment sections, and late-night TikTok breakdowns stitched together from old interviews and surveillance clips, one name repeatedly surfaced: Snoop Dogg. But in those theories, Snoop wasn't portrayed as the grieving mentor many people saw publicly. Instead, some online narratives suggested he might have known something ahead of time, or that he may have been connected to people who did. This is the version of events circulating in certain conspiracy circles, where the story shifts from grief to suspicion. However, the theories don't actually start with Snoop himself. They usually begin with Big U, a controversial figure often discussed in conversations about Los Angeles street politics and the Rollin' 60s Crips. Big U is widely known in that world and has a reputation that divides opinions sharply. Some people see him as a community figure who has tried to invest in and uplift neighborhoods. Others, particularly in online discussions, portray him in a far darker light. The conspiracy theory that spread across the internet claims that Big U supposedly had prior knowledge of what happened to Nipsey. Because Snoop Dogg was known to have a relationship with Big U, some theorists argue that Snoop must have either known about the situation beforehand or chose loyalty to Big U over Nipsey.
You know, he says Nipsey was looking out for him, basically saying, hey, they got paperwork on you.
Sit with that for a moment. The claim is that Big U was calling people saying that Nipsey Hussle had been killed. But when those people panicked and tried calling Nipsey themselves, he allegedly answered the phone. He was still alive. If you follow the conspiracy logic, that raises a serious question. Either Big U shared information he had no business knowing, or he somehow believed something was about to happen before it did. The internet quickly grabbed onto that idea and ran with it. And before long, those theories were pointing towards Snoop Dogg. The reason was simple. Snoop and Big U have known each other for years. Their connection, history, and documented relationship made them easy targets for speculation. In the minds of conspiracy theorists, the equation was straightforward. If Snoop was close to Big U, and Big U supposedly had early knowledge of the shooting, then Snoop must have either ignored warning signs or been connected to the situation somehow. That accusation has echoed across social media platforms for years, turning speculation into a narrative that many people continue to debate. But the confirmed facts about Nipsey Hussle's death tell a different story, one that is deeply tragic on its own. The man responsible was Eric Ronald Holder Jr., a 29-year-old with ties to the Rollin' 60s. On the day of the shooting, Holder arrived at the strip mall with a woman he had been seeing for about a month. He was also an aspiring rapper who went by the name Fly Mac. Earlier that day, Holder had stopped at Master Burger for chili cheese fries before spotting Nipsey in the parking lot near the Marathon clothing store. According to grand jury records and trial testimony, the two men spoke for several minutes. The conversation appeared calm. They shook hands, exchanged words, and there was no obvious hostility. During that exchange, Nipsey reportedly told Holder that rumors were circulating about paperwork connected to him. In that environment, paperwork.
I had to get up there. I want to look the in the face, and I still need to know why, because I know you didn't kill him behind the conversation.
Looking out for him. That's all it was. And Holder walked back to the whip, sat with his date, ate his fries. 9 to 10 minutes of silence. Then he loaded 2 straps, a semi-automatic and a silver revolver in the woman's car. She said no drive-a-bee in her vehicle. He didn't care. changed his shirt, circled the block, came back on foot. At least 10 shots. Close range. Nip fell like dead weight. Holder stood over him, said, "You're through," kicked him in the head and bounced. Nip's last words, "You got me." 2 bystanders caught rounds, including Kerry Laffin, a recently paroled man who'd gotten a care package from Nip weeks prior. Holder threatened his date, fled to a Motel 6, and turned himself in 2 days later at a mental health clinic. The question that consumed all of LA was one word. Why? Was it the snitch talk? Was it jealousy that had been simmering long before that Sunday? Was it something buried in the shared gang roots that neither man could escape? The prosecution would later say the conversation had little or nothing to do with the killing. That pre-existing envy was the real engine. The defense would say it was everything. That the snitch accusation in that world from a man that powerful triggered an uncontrollable psychological explosion. But for Cowboy, the man who was right there, who heard the words, who watched his brother bleed out on the concrete, the answer was a question he couldn't stop demanding.
I did not see this coming. No way, no how.
For Herman Douglas, the moment never made sense on a surface level. In his mind, a 4-minute conversation about rumors of paperwork wasn't enough to make someone load 2 guns, circle the block, and return on a mission. Cowboy believed something deeper was driving Eric Ronald Holder Jr., something far beyond a brief street conversation about snitching. That same question became central to what prosecutors tried to understand during the trial. Nearly 3 years passed between the killing of Nipsey Hussle and the moment the trial finally began. Pandemic shutdowns, court delays, and logistical challenges slowed the entire process. Meanwhile, Los Angeles continued mourning the loss of a figure many considered a symbol of community growth and resilience. When proceedings finally started in downtown Los Angeles in June 2022, the main question in court was not whether Holder was the shooter. That fact was never seriously disputed. Instead, the legal battle focused on the nature of the crime itself. Prosecutors argued it was first-degree murder, premeditated, deliberate, and planned. The defense pushed for voluntary manslaughter, suggesting the shooting happened in the heat of passion, without a meaningful cooling-off period. At the center of that argument was a small window of time, roughly 9 to 10 minutes between Holder's conversation with Nipsey and the moment gunfire erupted. For the prosecution, that gap proved planning. They argued that during those minutes Holder armed himself, changed his shirt, circled the block, and then returned to the scene on foot. According to their interpretation, those actions showed a conscious decision rather than a sudden emotional explosion. The defense saw it differently. They argued that accusations related to snitching carry extreme weight in certain environments and could provoke a powerful emotional response. In their view, the brief time between the conversation and the shooting wasn't enough for someone to calm down after such a confrontation. Before the jury even began weighing those arguments. However, the trial was shaken by a dramatic incident. While waiting in a holding cell before court proceedings, Holder was reportedly attacked by other inmates. According to reports from the courtroom, he suffered injuries that required medical treatment and returned to court with visible bandages and swelling. The incident delayed proceedings as his legal team raised concerns about safety. When the trial resumed, the focus returned to evidence and testimony. Deputy District Attorney John McKinney presented the prosecution's theory built around premeditation and long-standing resentment. Surveillance footage from the area was shown to the jury, outlining the timeline prosecutors believed demonstrated intent. Witness testimony also became critical. Cowboy took the stand as one of the most important eyewitnesses. He described the initial exchange between Nipsey and Holder as calm and non-hostile, reinforcing the idea that the conversation itself did not appear to escalate into a confrontation. His testimony helped establish the sequence of events, the conversation, Holder leaving the area, and the eventual return. But Cowboy's presence in the courtroom was about more than simply recounting events. The emotional weight of the moment was visible to everyone in the room. He had been close to Nipsey for years, and sitting only a short distance away from the man accused of killing his friend was a painful experience. Throughout the trial, the courtroom atmosphere remained heavy with grief and tension. Friends, family members, and supporters attended the proceedings, all confronting the same painful reality.
I just feel regret that I left aside. Should have never left aside.
The protector's nightmare, the one who walked away at the worst possible moment, and the weight of what he couldn't have predicted made it heavier.
For Herman Douglas, the situation felt like a protector's nightmare, the feeling of having stepped away at the worst possible moment. It left him carrying a heavy burden, even though what happened next was something no one could have predicted. During the trial, defense attorney Aaron Jansen tried to place the jury inside the mindset of Eric Ronald Holder Jr. He argued that in neighborhoods tied to the Rolling 60s culture, a public accusation of being a snitch from someone as influential as Nipsey Hussle could carry devastating consequences. According to the defense, such an accusation could mean social exile, constant fear, and the risk of retaliation within the only community someone might have ever known. Jansen portrayed his client as a man overwhelmed by humiliation, fear, and rage, a person whose judgment collapsed under the pressure of what he described as one of the most serious accusations in street culture. He told jurors that Holder had simply wanted to grab food and go about his day, suggesting the situation spiraled out of control after the conversation with Nipsey. The defense also mentioned that Holder had reportedly struggled with mental health issues in the past, including paranoia and hallucinations. However, those claims were not formally used as a legal defense during the trial. Prosecutors responded with a different interpretation. Deputy District Attorney John McKinney pointed to details that suggested planning rather than panic. Surveillance footage showed Holder returning to the scene after leaving, and evidence indicated he did not immediately approach Nipsey when he came back. Prosecutors argued that this gap in time contradicted the idea of a sudden, uncontrollable emotional reaction. Witness testimony throughout the trial was often emotional. Several people who had been present that day described the chaos in the parking lot, the sound of gunfire, and the shock of seeing Nipsey collapse.
Long story short, we ended up connecting, we ended up making music together, we ended up making a brotherhood, we ended up creating a bond, we created something that was special.
For Herman Douglas, the responsibility weighed heavily. He was the only living witness who could truly explain what Nipsey Hussle actually said during those final minutes before the shooting. That meant he carried something no one else could: clarity about the conversation that had since been twisted across social media. When Cowboy stepped into court, it wasn't just because of legal obligation. For him, it was about protecting the truth. The internet had already begun rewriting Nipsey's final moments, with rumors, speculation, and conspiracy theories spreading rapidly. Cowboy refused to let people who weren't there control the narrative of his friend's last chapter. Nipsey had spent his entire career shaping his own story. Through independent music releases, self-funded businesses, and community investments, he insisted on telling his story on his own terms. Cowboy believed the least he could do was make sure the final chapter of that story was told by someone who had actually witnessed it. On July 6, 2022, the jury reached its verdict. Eric Ronald Holder Jr. was found guilty of first-degree murder for the killing of Nipsey Hussle. The jury also convicted him of 2 counts of attempted voluntary manslaughter related to the bystanders who were injured during the shooting, along with a firearms enhancement charge. The defense had argued that the shooting happened in the heat of passion, but the jury rejected that claim. To them, the roughly 9 to 10 minute gap between the conversation and the shooting was enough time for someone to cool down. Prosecutors had carefully mapped out the timeline for jurors. According to their case, Holder's actions during those minutes showed deliberate decision-making. They pointed to the fact that he retrieved 2 guns, changed his shirt, circled the block, and eventually returned on foot. Each step, prosecutors argued, demonstrated intention rather than impulse. The jury ultimately agreed with that interpretation. When a verdict was announced, Holder reportedly showed little visible reaction. The courtroom remained tense as the reality of the decision settled in. Outside the courthouse, emotions poured out. Cowboy spoke with reporters afterward and became visibly emotional. While the verdict delivered accountability, he said it could not restore what had been lost. Nipsey Hussle had built more than a music career. He had opened businesses, created jobs, and invested in programs meant to uplift young people in the Crenshaw community. Many supporters believed he represented a rare example of someone who had succeeded in the music industry while remaining committed to rebuilding the neighborhood where he grew up. For them, the loss extended far beyond the death of a rapper. It meant the disappearance of someone who had become a symbol of opportunity and progress. The case reached its final stage on February 22, 2023, when Clay Jack II delivered the sentence. Holder received 60 years to life in prison. The punishment included 25 years to life for the murder conviction, another 25 years to life for the firearm enhancement, and additional years connected to the injuries suffered by bystanders. During sentencing, the defense attempted one final argument for leniency. Holder's father submitted a letter discussing his son's mental health history, including claims that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia as a teenager. The defense also referenced an earlier attack Holder suffered while in jail and argued that his life in prison would remain dangerous. They asked the court for a shorter sentence. The judge declined, describing the crime as deliberate and severe before issuing the full sentence. During the victim impact portion of the proceedings, Cowboy spoke again. His message focused less on the man convicted of the crime and more on the lasting impact left behind. For many people in Los Angeles, the verdict closed the legal case, but not the emotional wound. Throughout that time, another figure often mentioned in online conspiracy theories was Snoop Dogg. While some internet narratives attempted to link him to the tragedy, those claims never surfaced as evidence in court. In reality, Snoop Dogg had publicly mourned Nipsey Hussle following the shooting. The two artists had shared connections through Los Angeles culture and the West Coast rap scene. Over the years, they collaborated musically, including Nipsey's appearance on Snoop's 2009 song Upside Down. After Nipsey's death, Snoop also honored him through tributes and public statements expressing grief. For Snoop, whose birth name is Calvin Broadus Jr., the loss felt deeply personal. He spoke openly about the shock and sadness surrounding the tragedy, reflecting the reaction of many people in Los Angeles who saw Nipsey Hussle as far more than just an artist. Despite the conspiracy theories that circulated online, the court proceedings ultimately focused on the evidence surrounding the actions of Eric Holder Jr. The legal process established responsibility for the crime, but could never replace what the community lost. What remained was the legacy Nipsey Hussle had built, one rooted not only in music, but also in entrepreneurship, mentorship, and a vision for economic independence within his community. And for those who knew him personally, protecting the truth about his final moments became another part of preserving that legacy.